All right, today we are diving deep into the rugged and really fascinating history of Maine. There's so much more to it than just forests and coasts. It's a story of conflict, of industry, and of an identity that was forged over centuries. Let's get into it. But first, here's a great piece of trivia for you. Out of all 50 states, Maine is the only one with a name that's just a single syllable. So why is that? Well, the answer is all tangled up in a pretty interesting origin story, full of competing theories, French provinces, and even some old-school nautical terms. So here's our game plan. We're going to start by trying to solve that name mystery. Then we'll look at its time as a seriously contested frontier. We'll follow the long, tough road to statehood, see how industry shaped it into the Pine Tree State, and finally, we'll check out the challenges that are forging modern Maine today. Okay, so first things first, where in the world did that name Maine actually come from? Well, the truth is, nobody is 100% sure, but there are some really compelling ideas floating around. The front-runner, and the theory the state legislature made official back in 2001, is that it's named after the French province of Maine. But another really popular idea is that it was just a practical term, something sailors used to talk about the mainland as opposed to all those hundreds of islands off the coast. Then you've got other theories linking it to an English village connected to its founder, Sir Ferdinando Gorges, and there was an older theory, now disproven, that it was a nod to the French-born Queen of England. And what's really interesting here is that you can see how common the word was. Way back in 1614, years before the province of Maine was even a thing, Captain John Smith was already using the Maine as a general term for, the huge, unexplored mainland of North America. It was kind of like their way of saying the continent. Okay, so with the name more or less sorted, let's turn to the land itself. For more than a century, Maine wasn't some quiet, settled colony. No way. It was a fierce, contested frontier, a battleground where the French, the English, and the native Wabanaki peoples all fought for control. The first attempts at settlement were pretty much just trial and error. The French got there first in 1604, then the English showed up at Popham Colony in 1607, a settlement that fizzled out after just a year. For decades, it was just this messy patchwork of land grants, competing trading posts, and failed colonies. That is, until the powerhouse Massachusetts Bay Colony eventually just stepped in and took over the whole area. And this is the crucial point. The French and English had completely different game plans. The French, who were fewer in number, worked with the Wabanaki Confederacy. They built alliances through trade and missionaries. The English, totally different story. They showed up as settlers, focused on farming and building forts, which, of course, led to constant, brutal conflict over land. This one difference really defined life in Maine for generations. So, Maine's journey to becoming a state was actually a two-part struggle. First, it had to break free from Great Britain, along with all the other colonies, but then it had a second, much longer fight to break free from Massachusetts. During the American Revolution, Maine was anything but a quiet backwater. It was a hotbed of patriot activity. The first naval battle of the entire war happened just off the coast of Machias. The British retaliated by burning Falmouth, which we now know as Portland. And get this, they even occupied eastern Maine with this wild plan to create a brand new loyalist colony called New Ireland. That plan failed, but it just goes to show you how important this territory was. But the real tipping point, the last straw, came about 30 years later. During the War of 1812, British forces sailed down from Canada and just took over the entire coast from Eastport to Castine. And Massachusetts, which was supposed to be protecting the District of Maine, it did next to nothing to help. For the folks in Maine, this made it painfully clear. If they wanted to be properly defended, they were going to have to govern themselves. And this chart just shows you exactly where people stood. By 1819, they held a vote on whether to split from Massachusetts. The results were, well, they were overwhelming. In every single county, the vote was yes for statehood. The final tally was more than 2-1. The people of Maine had spoken, loud and clear. But the final hurdle wasn't in Maine, and it wasn't in Massachusetts. It was all the way down in Washington, D.C. You see, admitting Maine as a free state was going to upset the delicate balance of power in the Senate between the free states and the slave states. So a deal was struck, the famous Missouri Compromise. Maine would come in as a free state, and Missouri would come in as a slave state. The balance was kept, and that move finally paved the way for Maine to become the 23rd state on March 15, 1820. All right, so Maine is officially a state. And what happens next? Boom, it enters its golden age. The 19th century was all about this massive industrial boom, completely powered by the state's incredible natural resources. And to give you a sense of the sheer scale of this, just think about this. For a while in the 1830s, the city of Bangor, which is deep inland on a river, was the single largest lumber port on the entire planet. Millions of logs were floated downriver and shipped out to build cities all across America and the globe. Just incredible. But it wasn't just about lumber. I mean, with that long coastline and an endless supply of wood, what else do? You build ships? Maine became a world leader in shipbuilding. Those same rivers that carried logs also powered massive textile mills in cities like Lewiston and Biddeford. And then came the railroads, which turned Portland into a critical winter port for all of Canada. So all this economic power, it turned into major political clout. For almost 100 years, Maine held its state elections in September, a full 2 months before the rest of the country. So political experts would watch the results like a hawk, believing they could predict the national elections in November. This is where that famous political saying came from. As Maine goes, so goes the nation. So as we head into the 20th century, Maine starts to face some profound changes. Its old industrial base begins to shift, new waves of immigrants start arriving, and the social and economic divide that actually still exists today really starts to take shape. The mills and factories that powered Maine's economy were like magnets for people from all over. In the mid-1800s, it was a huge wave of Irish immigrants. Then later, a massive influx of French Canadians came down from Quebec to work in the textile mills, creating these vibrant neighborhoods called Little Canadas. And much more recently, in the 21st century, a new chapter has begun with refugees from Somalia and other African nations who have been revitalizing cities that were in decline. And this story is just wild, a time when a global war literally landed right on Maine's doorstep. It's 1915, before the U.S. even entered World War I. A German spy named Werner Horn tries to blow up the International Railway Bridge in Vanceboro to cut off Canadian war supplies. So picture this, he goes out in 30 below zero weather, plants the dynamite, and while the bomb does go off, it only damages the bridge. Horn was arrested almost immediately, partly because he got severe frostbite from the cold. What a story. So as those old industries, textiles, paper mills started to fade away, this really distinct divide emerged. Today, people talk about the two Maines. You've got the southern part around Portland, which has a growing population, a modern service economy, and is closely tied to Boston. And then you have the northern and eastern parts, which are much more rural, have seen populations decline, and are still trying to figure out what comes after the loss of all those traditional jobs. And that really leaves us with the big question today. I mean, from a contested frontier to an industrial powerhouse, Maine's identity has always been shaped by its economy and its people. As it navigates this modern divide, trying to balance its heritage with the need for new growth, the real challenge is figuring out a future that can work for both Maines. Hey, if you want to understand the state Maine separated from, you should check out our explainer on Massachusetts next in our U.S. States Histories playlist. And don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives. Thanks for watching.